Reza Pahlavi, welcome. Thank you for speaking to Reuters today in Paris. Over the past 4 months, we have interviewed more than 50 people, including 8 of your current and former associates, for our story about you. But our audience always benefits when the subject of our reporting agrees to answer questions. So thank you again.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Sure. So my first question is this. You've been campaigning in Europe and the United States, giving speeches, raising money, and meeting with elected officials to lead a transitional government in Iran. Yet the Trump administration does not seem to support you. So given all this, what is your route to return to Iran, and how soon do you think regime change can actually be achieved?
This campaign started as a lifetime mission to liberate Iran 46 years ago. And it has never been about me. It's been about the Iranian people and their right to self-determination, which is exactly what this is all about. It is not for a foreign government to decide who or what should be the alternative for Iran. That's up to the Iranian people. I've never asked for any kind of endorsement from any leader or governments. My entire mission in life, and I've said it time and again, is to see to it that the people of Iran will have that chance in the future, which determines what's the function of transition post-regime collapse, so we can have a constitutional assembly to debate whatever final secular democratic form, of course, needs to take place, and let the people of Iran choose.
But from where we're sitting today, when do you think regime change might occur?
I think we're very close to it. And the reason I say this is because, first and foremost, the regime is at its weakest it's ever been since 47 years. Not to mention the fact that in terms of legitimacy, it has totally lost any remaining possible legitimacy it might have had, in the sense that many governments in all these 4 decades have always followed the method of appeasement with the hope for behavior change and somehow contribute to legitimizing the regime.
Let me ask you about some of the statements you've made, though. You said in July 2024, you spoke to the National Conservatism Conference in Washington, and you said, quote, "My friends, we are not seeking your intervention." Then this year, in mid-February, you called on Washington to attack Iran, telling Reuters that, quote, "intervention is a way to save lives." And then once the war began, you told Fox News that, quote, "this is the game changer we've been waiting for all this time." So what caused your view on intervention to change between 2024 and 2026?
January 8th and 9th.
Okay.
When you're dealing with that level of massacre, it changes the entire prospect of things. Until a long time I said, we don't need to have any intervention, let the Iranian people be empowered. I've said for years, diplomacy doesn't work. War is not the solution. We are only left with a third way, and that is empowering the people of Iran. That's something I've been saying for at least the last 20 years all over Europe and the United States. What did change was what happened on January 8th. And at that case, I said, look, this intervention can actually help save more lives that will otherwise also. So it's really a matter of trying to protect more lives from being lost under this regime that is demonstrating that it has no limit in terms of how far it's willing to go to kill its own citizenry.
We interviewed a congressman who described you as articulate, humble, and presidential. But as I'm sure you're aware, you also have your critics. And I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable, but, some people point out that you've never had a salaried job, that you lack critical leadership skills. Scott Anderson, author of King of Kings, The Iranian Revolution, said that you live in a kind of royalist bubble and, quote, "everything I've always heard about him from people in the Iranian diaspora is that he's kind of a lightweight. And your main credential seems to be heredity. You were the son of the last Shah." So what is your response to this? I'm sure you've heard some of this before. You haven't set foot in Iran in 48 years. Your father went into exile after a popular uprising against his autocratic rule. What qualifications do you believe you have to lead a transitional government in Iran?
Well, if an attorney decides to take a case pro bono, does this mean that he doesn't have a job? I've been doing this voluntarily for free for 4 decades as my sacrifice for the sake of my country. I could have easily decided back in Cairo when my father passed away, you know what, to hell with it. I can pursue, like many others, a life, business, other things. Not that I didn't have connections, not that I didn't have people, but I decided to stay in it for the sake of my country, that I think in terms of civilization, in terms of culture, in terms of what they can offer the world, deserve much better than this regime and this government. So it's been a personal sacrifice for a lifetime. As far as track record, I think that's part of the reason today's youth in Iran that have followed me for these 46 years and have seen what I've said, what I've done, judge me by my own action. Has nothing to do with the past. Yes, I happen to have the Pehlevi name. And by the way, that's a positive. That's what people are chanting on the streets. Now, people are entitled to their opinion. Some people may not like my face. Some people may think that I should be doing this and that. I'm only honest with my own thoughts and principle and trying to be the best I can with what I can. And I try to bring as many elements that I believe can be supportive in getting the job done across the board. That is what I've been spending all my time doing by interacting with members of our community, with the diaspora, with people inside Iran, and of course the foreign component of it. Friends of Iran, those who believe that Iran does not deserve to live in the dark ages as we have, and remember an Iran that was prosperous, that was flourishing, their contribution to arts, to music, to science, you name it. And I think this is exactly why people are going on the streets today, sacrificing their lives for a better future. You never can have 100% of everybody's support. There's always going to be some exception. But I think for the most part, I'm enjoying a lot of support across the board, inside and outside of Iran.
I want to talk a little bit about your framework that you released last year about a transition government. It calls for a referendum, I think within 6 months, that could result in a parliamentary monarchy or a republic. Are you ruling out becoming the monarch if that's what the Iranian people want?
Well, I'm telling you, I'm not running for office. That has never been my preoccupation. And, you know, it also depends on at the end, what it is that best serves the country's purpose. At this point, I'm not focused about post-referendum. My only focus right now should be and is, how do we get to that final point? One of my roles is to unite people. I cannot unite people by representing an alternative in terms of the final product, as opposed to the process, because that's always divisive. That's why I'm telling you, don't look at me as the candidate running for office. Look at me as somebody who's provide you an avenue to that future, irrespective of what your final vote would be.
Okay, well, I want to get to the issue of unifying the opposition soon. But I want to first focus on what your activities, like, you know, in recent months. I've spoken to some of your financial backers who are part of a group that have donated more than $3 million to you, and I guess your campaign. And they say they've grown disillusioned with you for the following reasons. That you didn't immediately strongly criticize President Trump's social media posts that, quote, "We are blasting Iran into oblivion," or as they say, back to the Stone Ages. I know you later did in answer to journalist questions, but you didn't, immediately post something about it. That you haven't forcefully condemned some of the more radical supporters' violence against and the harassment of other Iranian dissidents. And they believe that you haven't tried hard enough to unify Iran's deeply divided opposition. They also say that they raised these with you not face to face, in private calls with you. But to their frustration, you haven't taken their advice. So what is your response to that?
Well, let me first start with I guess you would call them benefactors. I'm not going to change the mission based on the benefactor's expectation that I pay you, but you have to do X, Y, and Z. That's not the way it works.
Well, there were two things. One is that you haven't tried hard enough to unify Iran's deeply divided opposition, and that they've raised these issues with you. And that you haven't taken their advice.
Well, I think that for the last at least 2 years, I've been extremely active in broadening the tent, so to speak. In fact, I don't think I haven't had such a broad array of diverse representative of the Iranian opposition gathered under one roof. from all walks of life, ideologies. In fact, I've reached out to people who were, at the time, my father's worst enemies. Today, they are fully on board working with me. I'm talking about former Marxists, people who used to be member of the Tudeh Party, the Fedayan Khalq organization, former MEK members. I don't know how far more can you stretch the tent, including those people, to prove that, in fact, there is much more unity than ever, certainly inside Iran. There's never going to be a perfect coalition. But I think that I've extended this tent pretty large, and I don't know how much the people who make such statements have actually followed or are aware of the meetings I've had and the gatherings that I've had. But I can assure you this has been my efforts all the time.
In the space of a few months earlier this year, self-identified supporters of yours beat up a Kurdish reporter in London, hospitalizing him, and intimidated restaurant owners in London and Vienna, demanding they display Iran's pre-revolution lion and sun flag. At a meeting of the Iran Freedom Conference in London, some attendees were advised to leave via the basement because of fears of violence. When one attendee left on foot, anyway, he was spat upon. There were other incidents at CPAC in Texas in March, where one opposition activist was told by one of your supporters they would run her over in a truck if she didn't chant Javed Shah. Police in The Hague are investigating claims your supporters have harassed and threatened dissidents there.
We want to show you just a quick, this is very quick, but the Kurdish journalist who was hospitalized.
Yeah, what is your response to that?
I believe in pluralism. I believe in tolerance. I believe in civility, in debate, in argument, in comportment, respect, and no hostility of any kind, or no brutality of any kind. That goes for everyone. Anybody who claims to be my supporter has to understand that these are the guidelines. And anyone who would violate these guidelines, I don't consider a supporter, and I'll be the first to condemn that behavior. And if their behavior is criminal, that they will face the full penalty of the law in any country in which such violation has occurred. Let me be very clear about that. And finally, I would also say that don't forget that the regime has also a lot of plants, a lot of agents provocateurs, as the French will say, agitators, masquerading as supporters of this or that group, to create, in fact, this kind of conflicts.
These aren't isolated incidents. There's a pattern of behavior amongst your supporters, and it's violent.
As I said, I condemn it. I distance myself from that. I don't justify it. I don't condone it. And in fact, I ask for whatever authority it is to have them face the crime they've committed. You cannot just go and start brutalizing people. It's well beyond just the ethics and the moral conduct of it, but it has implications. We have to be respectful. How could we possibly guarantee the Iranian people in the future they'll be protected under the law and there'll be justice if they conduct themselves in this way and they want to be advocates of a future based on violence and retribution? Of course not.
I want to ask you something I'm hoping you'll address. And this is a criticism that's also, again, from some of your financial backers, that you haven't tamped down on some of the harsh rhetoric of some of your closest advisors. So, one example, in January, Saeed Ghassaminejad, he posted this on X. You're either with Prince Reza Pahlavi or with the Islamic Republic. If you're weakening the field commander for any reason whatsoever, you're an agent of the enemy. Also, and I apologize because I know this is going to be a bit awkward, but your wife Yasmin has also drawn criticism for some of her remarks and social media posts about other Iranian dissidents. She reposted on Instagram an image of an Iranian protester holding a sign reading, "Death to the three corrupts, mullahs, leftists, and mujahideen." I'm sure you've seen this. And she repeated the slogan in her own caption. So I realize it's some...
Well, first of all, what I know about this one in particular is this was a picture generated from inside Iran. during the Women Life Freedom movement, right. She took it as a spontaneous act there. When we realized what it was said, that she immediately took it down. Right. And she said later, to clarify, that of course I'm not advocating violence or death to this or that. So she said that on the record. So it would be unfair to say that she never took a position on that. As far as every single statement made by my team, we are certainly establishing a much stricter protocol now in terms of to what extent people who are closely associated with me have to be able to censor themselves, which is very unfair to begin with because it's a violation of free speech, but at the same time, you can no longer act independently. You have to be much more careful about what is said or not. And, understand one thing. I know Saeed Qaseminejad and others on my team. Some of them have lived the toughest possible ordeal to get to where they are today. They've been in jail in Iran. They've been tortured by the very same regime that are fighting for today. And so you have to understand that a lot of it could be humanly understandable in terms of pent-up frustration, what have you. I'm not saying that they should not curb some of their statements, and I've already talked to them about that. Hopefully that will be corrected. But you have to understand the sentiments out there. People in Iran are on the edge of revenge almost, are vengeful.
I want to ask you about the recent murder of Masoud Masjoudi, who, by the way, was a supporter of yours up until a certain point. He was a member of Forest Guard. And he was an academic who lived near Vancouver, and he became a critic of yours, as I assume you're aware, and he sued you in 2024 in two separate cases. And he alleged that you had directed cyber attacks on pro-democracy Iranian activists. Now, let me preface this by saying that there's no evidence at all that you had anything to do with his murder. That's not why I'm bringing this up. But Canadian prosecutors have charged two of your supporters with murdering him. What I'd like to ask you first is whether you knew Mr. Masjoudi or not.
I don't recall at all any meetings or discussions. I mean, thousands of people over the years have been participating in Zoom calls or what have you. He may have been in the mix. Honestly, I don't recall. But that's not the point. The point is, this is tragic what has happened. And whoever was responsible for this murder ought to be facing a court of law and be judged for the crime they've committed.
Just two things on the Masjoudi case. So when you signed two sworn affidavits, you said, I do not know the plaintiff, Masoud Masjoudi. And we found he posted on YouTube an audio Zoom call he had with you in 2021. It's 18 minutes long of him speaking to you.
It's possible. As I said, at the time, I said I did not recall because it's not like I have one Zoom call every 5 years.
Okay.
I have a Zoom call maybe twice a week with thousands of people in the mix. So honestly, remembering who was there and said something is not there. Sometimes people come in there not even with their own name. So my honest answer was at the time, and I still say the same thing, I really do not recall having had any specific conversation with this individual.
So I want to ask you about your relationship with the IRGC, because this is brought up in the Masjoudi case as well.
Relationship, that's a big word.
Now, you said in an interview in 2018 on Iran International that you've had dialogues with them in Basij, and that you've also more recently asked, some of them to defect. What exactly is your position on the IRGC?
Right. After the Green Movement and closer to the timeline where the Women Life Freedom Movement kicked in, I began receiving some, DMs in my social media by elements that say, I'm a Basiji in Mashhad, or I'm a member of the IRGC in such and such country. We hate this regime. We're not with them. We're looking for an opportunity to break away, blah, blah, blah. It was really a casual. And when I said to the media that I'm in touch with elements like that, it was in that context. It's not that I'm, in fact, talking to the IRGC command. Not at all. But there were elements of the Basij, of the Sepah, of course the military as well, that would communicate with me. discreetly, and obviously as a sign that, this is what the deal is. one of these days, there could be elements that are part of the military or the paramilitary force or the civilian bureaucracy of this very regime that may want to peel away and are not criminally responsible to have blood on their hands. Let's be clear on that. You know, when you have to do your military service, you have the option to serve in the military or Sepah. This is what many of the youth had to go through. Does that make them criminals? Not necessarily. And to detach the bulk of them from the top corrupt leadership that are directly implicated with those atrocities and that violence and that repression, you have to be able to detach the same thing. When you look at the Second World War, and at the end of the Second World War, you had the Nuremberg trials, right? You put on, prosecuted the top leaders of the Third Reich. But I don't think that it was meant to go after every single soldier that served in the German army. In the same sense, and especially when you look further at what happened in Iraq after the Ba'athification, and part of the reason why regime change has gotten a bad name in the West. Why was it? Because it was so poorly implemented and executed in Afghanistan and particularly in Iraq, where the Republican guards were sent home. Half of them ended up becoming ISIS fighters. I didn't want that to be repeated in the case of Iran. So let me complete this and to give you the evolution of thinking. And I said, okay, so we need to make sure that there's always an exit strategy available, again stressing for those who are not responsible for murder or criminal behavior. That should be, even in the transitional justice, I think that's part of the thing we're going to look at. But then, Sepah started acting far more violently. Sepah started to become an actual instrument and an obstacle, not only against their own citizenry, the proxy wars extending all the way to the Western Hemisphere, at which point, and for at least the last 10 years, I've been one of the first advocates of proscribing the IRGC as a terrorist organization. For two reasons. Number one is, in fact, their behavior is nothing short of being terror at home and abroad. And as a means of our approach to my 5-point plan of action that includes maximum pressure on the regime, one of them is putting more pressure on the regime by proscribing the IRGC, which is the key element that holds this regime in place. And I've asked that, and I've campaigned for it for the past few years in Europe in particular. But even in recent months when I was in Britain, and I'd asked the same question from former British prime ministers, why is it that your government has not proscribed the IRGC? And they gave their answer. But I've been a very strong advocate for putting IRGC on the list. Why? Because I thought that this is now a moment where they are no longer, they're an actual impediment and obstacle to our liberation. And for that reason, they have to be categorized as an element that is a menace, not just to our own citizenry, but are now an actual threat to foreign civilians, British citizens, German citizens, Swedish citizens, journalists, members of the LGBT community, the Jewish community, so on and so forth.
So to be clear, you think there are elements within the IRGC that can be rehabilitated?
If you've been directly responsible for calling for people to be massacred and murdered, that's an unforgivable crime. What the penalty is, that's not for me to decide. That's for the future judicial system and whatever is the law of the land at the time. What is the punishment for that kind of behavior? But at the same time, what I'm saying is that there are various degrees of culpability.
There have been reports, they're kind of anonymous, that you've received funding from Israel and Saudi Arabia. Is that true?
Absolutely false. I have not been a recipient of any governmental or public fund on the outside. Every dime that comes to my campaign comes from private donations of supporters. Hopefully we'll have more benefactors that give us bigger checks.
Unless there's something else that we haven't brought up that you'd like to address.
I have absolute confidence that once we are liberated, all of these areas of darkness or negativity will completely disappear. I have faith in that. If I didn't, I wouldn't bother with this, honestly. So maybe we're not made for it. Maybe we don't deserve any better. Maybe, as one of the saying goes, you judge people by the governments they have. But in this case, it's an exception. Iran was occupied by a regime that from day one waged war against us as a nation. And this is not us. And so that's why I think that a regime that celebrates martyrdom and calls for violence is not representative of Iranians that are peaceful and want that. And that defines exactly our campaign, how we differ from the people currently occupying our country. And whether I'm around or not, whether I get to Iran one day or not, look at the forest and the 92 million strong nation that waits to be part of a free world, and they deserve to be there, and that's what I'm fighting for.
Reza Pahlavi, thanks so much again for speaking with Reuters today.
Thank you both.